Welcome to RES 502 Action Research. I'm looking forward to working with you during the next semester in this research methods subject and also in your action research project. I find research methods is very interesting. You find out new things, you use skills in researching, and then action research is particularly interesting in that you put it into practice and then you see how people respond. And that's the task that you'll be going to invited to complete in this subject, particularly as it relates to the topic areas that you're interested in, and particularly two vitally important subjects of mathematics and English, and the ways in which these relate to other subjects that you could be teaching. Action research is the method in which teachers are able to reflexively examine their own classroom lived experience. And so it involves reflecting on how you teach and how your students learn. The delivery of this subject will be through a session every fortnight for 1.5 hours in weeks 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 and 12. And then in the other weeks, you're asked to complete the reading and the study and the watching of the videos in your own time and to take some notes. And you're asked to spend about 10 hours a week on the subject, each subject that you study, and also to spend about half of that time doing your assignments and half doing the reading and study for that particular week. You're also asked to participate in various discussions, meet with peers, and one of the easiest ways to do that partly is through our fortnightly gatherings and discussions. You're asked to also prepare a professional portfolio in which you will collect some information about your teaching and your subject area. And there's a lot of material on teaching portfolios. And I like the material presented by the University in Massachusetts in particular, in which they say that a teaching portfolio has two major aims. The first is to develop a reflective approach that'll improve your teaching. So in your portfolio, you might write about what you've seen, what you're collecting, about the material, and you might reflect on how that can help you to know your subject well and also help you to know the process of teaching and how students learn well. And then secondly, a portfolio is particularly important when you apply for work, when you apply and talk to a headmaster or a teacher, and you're going to show what you're able to do. And so there'll be material in there that relates to the particular subjects you teach and also the approach that you take to teaching. In your portfolio, you often include something about the philosophy and the goals that you have in teaching, something about your teaching experience and responsibilities, your methods and strategies, and then something about the particular subjects that you teach, the activities that you undertake to teach the subject and also to improve your teaching, and your goals and plans for the future and professional development. You might also, if you're a Christian, include something about your Christian background, or if you have other areas that are particular motivations in what you do, you might include material from that as well. In the state that you work, such as New South Wales, there could be material as well which relates to these areas, such as the Guidelines for Quality Teaching in New South Wales outlines the purpose of a portfolio as giving insights into teaching practice, developing a career record, assisting in applications for promotion, recording professional development, reflecting on your past, present and future practices, including some self-evaluation, celebrating growth and achievement, acquiring new skills, developing key experiences and gaining recognition, and help and encourage others. You should also develop an observation journal where you observe teaching and also reflect further on your own teaching and keep a record. And in many professions these days, they encourage a weekly addition and writing in your journal of those things that you've observed and learnt. And whatever your subject area is, it's worth collecting resources each week and putting them in some file as well. We've also developed an action research handout, which you'll find on the Moodle page, that outlines what will be covered in this subject and the learning outcomes that we are aiming for, and what we will cover each week. So I encourage you to work through the learning outline and the learning outcomes and handout in order to be familiar with that which is going to be covered. As the prerequisites for this subject, including EDU 401, Foundations, and other subjects, you will cover material on the historical development of teaching and also certain teaching styles and theories, as well as your particular subjects. And there's material that you have there that you could develop further. You might only use 5% of the ideas from the other subject, and then you might develop a lot more research material in your literature review and in the studies that you do, and you would be able to develop those ideas further in your action research project and proposal, particularly as it relates to English and mathematics, which are so central in all of the subjects that we teach in primary and secondary school. So in the first week, we covered a number of topics which you're asked to have read and studied. And now in the second week, we're moving on to review those, and then we will be looking at further topics as they go through. And then each week, in week 4, we'll be looking at weeks 3 and 4 in the video class on the Monday night. You're asked to complete 2 assessments, and so in week 5 you will have written 2,000 words, and you may have written much more, but you'll edit it down to 2,000 words, which will be your proposal and your literature review. And then by week 13 you will have developed that to 8,000 words, in which you'll not only have material from your proposal and your literature review, but you'll have carried out the project, and then you'll examine and evaluate the results that you get from that project, and then you'll draw conclusions from those, and then you'll look at the ways they can be applied in your teaching and also in the material that you develop in your teaching. Let's begin now with looking back on the material covered last week in week 1, where you read about the introduction to what an action research project is and the aims and the objectives that we have in action research in this project, but also in the years ahead in your teaching career. In this subject, you're asked to do a lot of self-directed learning, and when you're teaching, there's a lot of self-directed learning in which you've got to make quite a bit of discovery, particularly in this subject, about what is research, what are some good, healthy research methods, and there's books out there on that, and we'll show you how you can locate some resources on research methods. And then action research is a particular approach to research where you put it into action, and then you look at what unfolds and what you can learn. And even a difficult project or a project that doesn't go according to plan can be one that we can learn a great deal from. We also look at the paradigms that we bring to research, and we'll look at a couple of major paradigms for research, and we can develop those further. Let's begin by thinking, what is research and what is action research? And I'd like you to take a few moments now to write down what is good research, effective research, and to think about what is effective research. Often we use terms such as scientific or evidence-based. Well, you might have other terms that you've used in which we carefully observe, we look for support. All of these ideas that you might have written down as to what is good research we'll come back to and we'll visit later. And I want you to think a little bit about what's action research in terms of putting this into practice and how we learn through this. Certainly, one of the first ways in which we can find out about research and action research is by going to some of the resources that we've provided in this subject, but you can also look up some other resources yourself. For instance, if you would go to Google Scholar, which is a much better search engine than just Google. In Google Scholar, you could put in action research in education, and you could also put in primary school education, you could put in primary school, preschool mathematics or English, and then you would find some examples of action research there. And you would also find some information about research projects that people have carried out. So an action research project, you might find one here that you could explore further. And so here is a Google book that is readily accessible by you, and you can read parts of this Google book, Action Research in English Language Teaching. And it'll begin with some description on what action research is. And then they have a number of stages in action research that they say, firstly, planning an action. And even before the plan, you ask questions, you look at problems, you look at issues. And so we're wanting to teach English or mathematics. What are some of the problems that we think are faced? And you might write these down, take note of those. And then we develop a plan. What's our plan of action? So we might develop some strategies to help work with the students so that they might do well in English or mathematics. And then we put the action into practice. A lot of research without action research simply focuses on point 1 or 2. That is, we do research, we plan, we think about what we do. But action research goes further. It puts the plan into action and it observes what happens and then it reflects on what happens. And it's a particularly valuable approach to research. What I like about Google Scholar is that it also gives you the reference. If you click on Cite, you can see the reference here. And you could also look up other resources. So if I click on Control-C, I can make a copy of that reference. And so using Google Scholar, you can make a copy of the reference and you can locate resources such as this. And you can take some notes on these resources and you could collect 10 or 20 resources for use in your action research project. So this is just one example of resources that you can find using Google Scholar, but we've given you some others in the notes. Edith Cowan University is particularly useful, and there's a number of resources from Edith Cowan University, including this one on action-based research, where the librarians talk about what action-based research is. And so you can take some notes from this. That Stephanie and others have prepared for the libraries on action-based research and what it is. Of course, you could Google what is action-based research. The difficulty is if you just Google, you won't be able to locate who the scholars are and what their background is. And even worse, if you go to Wikipedia, you've got no idea where the information comes from. But if you go to Google Scholar and type in what is action-based research, then you'll find that you'll be able to locate the scholar. And so here we've got what is action-based research. And then if we go to the article, we can find out a bit more about the scholar, Kemmis, and we could find a bit more about his background. And we got some great material there. And we've got the resource here. And so we could do some good research based on the very scholarly material that Kemmis has proposed on action-based research. And we could find out a bit more about Kemmis and his background. And so if you do a bit of exploring on the author, Stephen Kemmis, he's at Charles Sturt University School of Education. And you could find a lot about the author, their background, what's driving them, what their ideas are, which is totally different to using something like Wikipedia, which we haven't got a clue whether it's just a person down the road with no qualifications or whether it's a person who's highly qualified. slide. By going to Google Scholar, we know that Professor Chemist is a professor in education, Charles Sturt University, and so we've got some terrific insights from him. So I encourage that Google Scholar is a much better way to locate and develop resources. But the big question we're seeking to identify here is how do we understand action research, and how do we use action research in what we do, and then how do we apply it? So back to Edith Cowan University. Stephanie and others from the library here have told us that action research is research that's done often by a practitioner who's putting into practice their research. And the purpose of the research is often to find and solve practical problems, such as how do you teach better? How do you teach what you're teaching? And how do you improve your teaching there? This is not just sales pitch. This is actually getting to the nuts and bolts of what's working in terms of the material you present, the students, and how they learn in ways that you can fully understand what's going on. And this becomes complex because you've got psychological processes, you've got sociological processes, you've got pedagogical and teaching processes, you've got the complexity of who you are, the complexity of who your students are. And if there's 25 students, every one of them has a different personality and a different background, different social setting, and they're learning in different ways. So there is a complexity. One way to solve this is to do a small number of case studies in which each student, each teacher is a particular case. Or you can increase the number and you can sample that number, and you can look at the way in which the sample develops. So I encourage you to explore further the question, what is action research? And to write a paragraph or two, a page or two on the nature of action research, the strengths of action research. And if you really want to get higher marks, also include some of the problems and the difficulties with action research. What are the limitations of action research? A scholar who does really well, a student or teacher who does really well, is one who can spot the strengths of things and also spot and understand the difficulties and the problems that different approaches take. Another resource on action research projects is another one by these workshops here. So, and this one's a PowerPoint resource that we could go to. So I encourage you to have a look at this PowerPoint. And this one is from the Edith Cowan University again. And we have here a resource from Action Research, and the Action Research cycle from an Action Research conference. And it describes here some of the different materials. So I encourage you to make use of this resource and to apply that resource as well. And we can go to another page here, put the resource in, and from the link from Edith Cowan University will take us to this PowerPoint again. And we'll see a number of points, and yeah, a lot of resources that you can draw on that relate to action research. And here we see that action research seeks to improve practice and methods. And the way it does this, we mentioned before, is that you come up with a plan, you act on the plan, you reflect on it, and then you share results. And before you develop the plan, you often have a previous step, which would be to do a literature review, to propose problems and questions, then to develop your plan from that. In acting on the plan, you have to make certain decisions about methodology, and we could discuss here the different methodologies that you would use. And then in your reflection, you would do some analysis and some coding. And then in sharing your results, you would write up your findings. And so if you'd like to find out more about action research, I encourage you to explore further the nature of action research, what it sets out to do, why it's effective, and why it may have some challenges. And I encourage you to bring some of these questions to our discussions each 2 weeks online and to ask some questions about your thoughts on action research. How does it work well? And why do we sometimes have some difficulties? Take a moment to think about your own work in English and mathematics and in other subjects and in other areas of interest you have. What are the major problems and questions and issues that you have? I've been teaching maths and science and social sciences, humanities for many years. And I think I'm always asking questions about how does the student learn. I'm asking questions about the differences, and I would like to develop a template for the differences between students, because some students are head students, heart students, hand students. There's lots of different things going on in students' lives. So I'd like to know about what's going on in students' life. These are all questions that you and I can ask. Talk to other members of your group, talk to other people you know, and generate some questions that you would like to investigate in your action research project. So that's one of the first big things that you have to decide is which topic, which subject are you going to examine? And then within that, which is going to be the subtopic that's of most interest to you, and how are you going to examine it will be the next big question. What will be the method of study? So you may choose maths or English, and then within that, you may choose a big question that you have about teaching in that topic area. And then for the method, you might think, oh, I could introduce a method here that could be much better for teaching maths and English. How am I going to evaluate that? Some people choose then some students they know that they're able to work with, or others choose family members or others that they've got contact with. And then they put into practice what they're doing, and then they evaluate what they find. And there are various ways to record your findings. Some people would video record, some would audio record, and there are other ways to record your findings. You might ask a quiz or a questionnaire. And then you look at the ethics questions. How do I protect the privacy and ethical responsibilities that I have towards these people so that there's no danger at all of any harm or difficulty coming to my students? So we have an ethics form that we need to fill out on the way. As we go through, there are a number of worldviews that we could be working with. One is positivism, which says that we can positively identify what is happening. And then there is post-positivism, which says that beyond positivism, it's not quite so easy to verify what is happening. So positivism is often very objective. Post-positivism asks some questions about that. And then constructivism says, whatever we say that we understand is really constructed by us using language and ideas. So constructivism is a rather different worldview to what we're saying. So if we're teaching maths and English, do we have absolutes or are we constructing a model? These are areas that you might want to think about, or you might want to skip over them and move forward, but they're important questions about how we know reality. Certainly a lot of people would argue that we have a very positivistic, objective way of knowing reality. The danger with this is that you can become blindly painted into a corner of your own making and say we know these things, and in the end, they're not true. You constructed it, and that's why constructivism is so valuable. The danger with constructivism is that we can say we constructed so much there's no reality behind it, which is why many scholars have looked to the concept of critical realism. That is, they say there are real, objective, positive things that are there, but critically, we must realise that we're constructing a lot of our own views of those. And so critical realism finds a position that sees truth in both positivism and objectivity, and also constructivism as well. We also have to make a decision between quantitative inquiry. We set out to collect quantitative data where people write down that they apply our method in maths and English, and then they write down whether it's successful. The intent is to collect this data. We've got a lot of numbers. We find that 83% show an improvement. The difficulty is that we find it hard to go deeper, whereas qualitative inquiry asks more open-ended questions and says, when you were filling in the answers to the maths or the English problems that we set and the guidelines that we provided, how we are feeling, what was working, tell us, talk to us. And you get a lot more open-ended answers which go in all sorts of directions. And we then need to analyse and codify and examine these qualitative answers. I really like qualitative inquiry, though I must admit I use quantitative questionnaires with a Likert scale 0 to 7, and you mark in how you're going. And both are valuable, quantitative and qualitative. In your research project, are you going to use quantitative questionnaires? Are you going to use qualitative group discussions and focus groups, or a combination of both? And you can find value in these different approaches. So in quantitative, we often set up an experiment. We carry out the experiment that we're aiming for. We have controls. Whereas in qualitative, we often have a more open-ended interview and share a coffee and some biscuits, and we talk about what they think, and then afterwards we have to codify what they say. What's the meaning of the different words that are then shared at the end? So the validity of quantitative data, where we got yes, no answers, tightly described, is statistical, whereas the validity of qualitative comes down to how we examine the words and the ideas that are shared. And mixed methods uses a mixture of both qualitative and quantitative, which can involve exploring what is happening. And on a more focused level, we can triangulate and bring the data together and seek to identify clearly which area we are working on. Remember, we said we come up with a plan to answer some questions. We identify a problem. We then set out a survey or focus groups. We then carry that out. We gather the data, and then we begin to think, how do we apply this further? That is, what are some methods in maths or English or the areas of interest that we have that we can test, that we can validate as being very effective. So I encourage you to spend some time thinking about how you're going to apply this model of firstly planning, and before you do your plan, you probably even need to do a literature review of some ideas. And before you do your plan, you often need to think about the questions that you have, the puzzles that you have, the ideas that you're wanting to explore. And then you come up with a plan. What am I going to do in maths and English to help my students to learn a lot more? And so in my maths class, am I going to have cake and teach fractions and chop the cake into pieces, or jelly beans? And then that might get my students highly motivated, but is it going to help them learn more? And then we carry out our project, our action, and then we record what happens. And different ways we can record, as we said before, students can write down their results. We can take a video of it. We can audio record. And then we do the analysis. We reflect on our findings, and then we write it up. And writing up is so vitally important as well. You need to set aside sufficient time for the writing up. So at the end of week 1, we've set about thinking about the project that we're working on. We've set about thinking about what research is. We've set about thinking about what action research is, with those 4 steps of planning, acting, reflecting, and sharing. And now we start to think about what's the research that we're going to do? What's our passion? What's our area of interest, particularly as it relates to maths and English? And how can we explore that further? And so what topic is going to give you most benefit for your future, most benefit for your teaching, most benefit for your life, for your study? And you might want to think about how effective that can be. I remember once I wanted to do a research project on life in heaven after people die. And at university, I went along and said, I want to do this research project of what life is like for people after they die. And I remember the professor saying to me, this is going to be very hard to investigate, Sam. And I did discover that, yes. We looked at the white dot as a person's fading away from this life, and we looked at all sorts of explanations and near-death experiences. So it was a good project, but it was a challenging concept to investigate. Ethics. It's important that you write up an ethics review of what you propose to do and how you safeguard all the people that are participating. It's important that you write up your proposal and what you're setting out to do. It's important that you read the research materials that you're going to need. And then now in this week, as we move on to week 2, we begin to think more deeply about some of the concepts that we're going to be using in our action research project, particularly the concepts such as paradigms. And we think more deeply about some of these paradigms, such as we said before, modernity over the last 300 years has brought the idea of positivism. That is, we can identify molecules, we can identify neurons in the brain, we can identify what's happening when a student misbehaves, we can describe it very happily and fully, so description can be very effective. But have we fully understood everything that's going on? So this positivistic objective understanding, where we claim objectivity, can often miss out on understanding many other aspects of what's taking place, such as social dimensions, cultural dimensions, home background dimensions that we know nothing about. All of those things can be important. And for spiritual people, Christian people, there can also be many unseen dimensions and aspects there. The world is bigger and more complex than the modernists and the objective and the positivists say. If you go to, say, a spinal doctor who works on backbones and ask them questions, they're going to come up with spinal doctor answers. You go to a particular chemistry person who studies one particular aspect of chemistry, they're going to come up with answers in their area. And one of the dangers of modernity with its reductionism is that it focuses on these small areas. Often what we need is a more holistic understanding that understands the social and the cultural and the spiritual and the Christian and all of these various dimensions. So in week 2, we want to take a few moments to think in our action research, what are some of the big picture questions that are taking place, as well as realizing the need to focus on the details and be as objective as we can. We want to realise that there's different types of language, such as in mathematics, we've got mathematics language, in English, we've got English language, in sociology, we've got sociological language, in cultural studies, we've got cultural languages. To what extent are some of these language concepts going to be important in understanding what we are involved in? Because every one of these language concepts also relates to a whole heap of ideas about what is unfolding in the area that we are looking at. When it comes to the bricolage or the method and approach or the action that we are taking, then if you're going to, say, be constructing an automobile, what are all the steps involved? When it comes to constructing a research project, What are we putting together? And even more interesting, when you start to learn mathematics from preschool to year 1 to year 2, how are the concepts coming together? Or in language, when we start to put phonic sounds together and we put the letters together, how are these different phonic concepts coming together with clues from pictures and other background clues as well? In terms of triangulation in research, if you're bushwalking, then you often might see a mountain and another mountain, and you draw a line from 3 different mountains. You can work out where you are. And in research, we use triangulation from a number of different data points that increase the credibility and validity of our findings. And so triangulation in research looks at multiple methods or data sources. So you might have your qualitative research that carried out this way, and then it's confirmed by another source and another source. Certainly one of the things that we often do in terms of multiple sources is in terms of our literature review, is we try and use a number of different sources. And so when we go to Google Scholar, we put the different sources in, and then using these different sources, and if you go to Google Scholar and we're looking at mathematics, action research, primary school, and we could put other words in as well. If we collect just one resource, we just have one point, that there's no triangulation at all. If we collect 2, 3, 4 items of research, or 3 or more items of research, we have the data coming from 3 different points. We're more likely to know where the data is. If we collect the data from 3 points that are close together, that is, we've got 3 fundamentalists or conservatives, or 3 people who hold a similar view, that has less triangulation than if we have 3 different perspectives on what we are looking at. So we encourage you to look at research that has different perspectives, and you can say some people have the view that mathematics is learned through this, and others have the view that we learn mathematics from preschool to primary school through this happening. So triangulation is a particularly useful resource for helping us to understand what is going on. And so just as a triangle has these points that show where things are, and just as in orienteering and crossing the country, the triangulation helps you to find where you are located, located in the landscape. Triangulation helps you to find that location in the landscape of all the research that is going on. So I encourage you to be familiar with the idea of triangulation, and in literature review, to use at least 10 or 12 scholarly resources, and I would say 15 to 20, and good quality scholarly resources where every scholarly resource we can identify who the scholar is, so that we could find out about their background, what year the material was published, that we know they came from a reputable university and they were publishing in a reputable scholarly journal or book by a reputable publisher. And so the literature review is so vital in helping you understand the way scholars who've put in 10s, 20s, 30s years studying this area that you're interested in, and they've come up with insights that their sweat and tears have produced. If you can draw on good, strong scholarly literature in your literature review, such as you will find at your college library, and also in good search items such as Google Scholar, then you'll do well. The other thing that we ask you to do in week 2 is to draw up a timeline. So write down how many weeks do we have. You might even get a calendar and write it out. So a number of weeks, until the proposal is due, and with the proposal, what's required in the proposal, and then how many weeks until the final project is due. And then in between this, we need to come up with our method, and then we need to come up with our action, how we're going to carry it out. And then we need our results to be collected. And then once they're collected, they need to be analysed. And when they're analysed, we then need to code them. And often you need to set aside quite a bit of time here. Obviously, the success of your project will depend on having some good results, but also having some powerful analysis, and then being able to link that back to your literature review where you've got 10 or 20 other scholars who've said some interesting things about the work that you are doing. Don't forget, you also need to do the ethics proposal. And then in weeks 3 and weeks 4, we'll discuss further some of the research methods that are used. We'll go around the class and we'll talk about the projects that students are working on. And I find that very exciting as we hear about this student is working in one area. I've had students working with First Nation, Aboriginal students, students working with very young students. All sorts of possibilities that you can research and look at, and then we finally put it all together in your project. So look forward over the next few weeks to working with you more on these areas that we'll be looking at. Just before we go, I might mention the concept of grounded theory and deduction and induction. So deduction occurs where we do literature review and we find some great concepts on maths teaching, English teaching, and we deduce that they could be applied and this could work. Often this is called a top-down model. D for deduction, D for down. We work from the theory down. So from theory, from ideas down. However, the weakness of this approach is that you are bringing your ideas in. You're not actually working with raw data, so you could be imposing your ideas into the data. Some scholars have come up with an approach that they prefer that is called the inductive method, where they begin with raw data and no presuppositions at all. And this is called the grounded theory approach. So rather than telling students how they should learn maths or English, we put a problem in front of, say, 10 students, and then we ask how would they work that out. And so we might put the problem, work out the area of a circle to the students. And then we might find that some students would divide the circle up. And so we've got ways to work out the area of a circle. And then we could look at the different ways a student would chop up a circle. The great advantage of this is that it builds on the student's own ideas and enthusiasm for chopping a circle up in different ways. So rather than imposing these theories and formulas on the students, we allow students to discover concepts like pi and r and radius and that for themselves as they chop the circle up in different ways. And so that would be an inductive approach, working from the raw data, as opposed to a deductive approach where we say some of the best ways to learn how to work out the area of a circle are, then we work from that down. So I encourage you to think a little bit about, will your project have mostly deduction, mostly induction, mostly top-down, working from theory and literature review, or working from observation of raw data, or both. And I think there tends to be often an interplay between those. I think too about objectivity and modernity, or whether we are constructing the world and the ideas in what we do. But most importantly, come up with an area that you are passionately interested in, that you are wanting to explore. Come up with a method of exploring that, bring it to our next class, send me an email, outline what you plan to do. I can then respond to that, and together I'll be able to be your coach alongside, encouraging you in areas that you can explore that'll be helpful for your teaching, helpful for your future career, help you for life more broadly. And if you have any questions, get in touch. I look forward to working with you in the time ahead. Thank you, and let's meet again soon. Thank you.